much of our religious observance of God, we might get the idea that whatever God is, he is out there, big and distant in the universe. But during this Christmas observance, we seem to inhabit a very different sort of story.
But God born, God killed, and God raised from the dead. The deep mystery is in the humanity of the story of God.
What does the humanity of the story of God tell us about God? And what does that kind of God tell us about us?
When you're invited to the way the world is supposed to be, you are invited as you. You are invited as you. Your whole self gets to come.
Humanity, God, and the humanity of God. Today on Don't Hold Me to This.
But I've been thinking a lot, and we've been thinking a lot and talking a lot, and we've even brought it up in previous podcast conversations. But I feel like, especially having gone through a serious kind of event, a one-time event trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and experience the body impact of
Yeah.
that. I've just come to the conclusion, whether rightly or wrongly, that the church, I think, acknowledges the importance of the body, but I don't think it gets it.
Yeah.
I don't think it really. I think when it comes down to it, like when it comes down to somebody's, spiritual maturity, we assume that the avenue through which that happens is through the spirit, right? Really through the mind,
Yeah.
often the brain,
Right.
and into this thing that we don't even really know what it is, that we call the spirit or the soul. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist or it's not true. I'm just saying I don't think we know how to actually tend to the thing that we actually do have some maybe at least more direct contact with, which is our body and our humanity. And I've been thinking about this because for a long time, you and I have talked about this, but one of the things that just came to mind when I was thinking about the scriptures and the story, and the thought came to me that the story is sort of a body inclusio, if we can do that, right? So the body is created first, and then there's this nephesh event where life is breathed into the nostrils of that physical being. And then the way the Bible tells it, and Christian history has taught it, is that at death our spirits leave us, but salvation, the story can't end until the body. And so it begins with this creation of the body, and it can't be finalized until the body is raised up in wholeness and in its design. I think that has to inform our thinking, that and many, many other things, like the incarnation, which is what we truly celebrate at Christmas, have to shape our understanding of the body, and our understanding of God, at least round out what's maybe become truncated and diminished in our spiritualization of the story of God and his love for the world. So those are the thoughts that have been bouncing around in my head, along with others. I think it certainly invites us to consider the question of what is God's relationship to humanity. If we're image bearers, one of the things I've come to say is anthropomorphisms only makes sense. It only makes sense to describe God as having hands or a face. It only makes sense if it makes sense. If somehow that maps onto something that's true of God, even if we would, affirm that God doesn't have a body like we do, that God is a spirit. It's what the scriptures say. It's what the confessions have said. But I think for God to be anthropomorphized, for that to communicate anything, it has to communicate something real about who God is, and our relationship to him.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what the story of the Bible eventually says is to know God, to come into contact with God, we have to come into contact with the embodied God,
right?
The God who is now incarnate in the person Jesus. So we don't get to know God apart from that. So somehow the eternal, omnipresent God has become localized in a person, and that is itself a revealing of who God is, and is the most authoritative. It is the most revelatory revelation of who God is. Somebody I was reading recently, somebody said, in something like, in Jesus, God becomes a manger wetter.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, God wets the bed. If everybody feels particularly uncomfortable now, like I do, having said that out loud, I think it is because we have construed human embodiment and all of the eccentricities and limitations that go along with that as somehow bad. It's a deficiency. To be embodied is a deficiency. And so then the trajectory of spirituality is a getting away from the body, a getting away from our expression in time and space. So we think about discipleship and growth as a human, as in the kind of evangelical Christian tradition, as primarily having to do with the growth of our mind's comprehension of doctrinal statements. But somehow discipleship for Jesus and his disciples included a lot of walking around, right? A lot of physical movement that was part and parcel of the growth that they were supposed to experience. It's difficult in a moment, I think, when the way that we've come to talk about spirituality has become a synonym with immateriality, a kind of etherealness.
Yeah.
It feels like what we're doing is taking a thing that we've all agreed on. Spirituality is immaterial. Spirituality is ethereal. It has to do with thoughts and ideas and a kind of contemplation of those things. And then what it feels like we're doing is trying to figure out, now, how does the body fit in with that? And I think the answer is, well, it doesn't. But that's okay, because we've gotten spirituality wrong. If spirituality is synonymous with etherealness, with immateriality, then that's some spirituality other than what the Bible anticipates. The central spiritual practice that Jesus leaves behind for his disciples to engage in, and then to share with generations of followers of Jesus after that, is a meal,
right?
Where they sit down together, break bread, and eat it and drink wine. That's the place where we most centrally come into contact with who God is sitting down at table, having a meal with each other, and I would argue with him. Jesus is present at the meal both as the sacrificial lamb and as the host of the meal. He gets to be both roles. He is both the meal and the host of the meal. And I think an additional challenge to that is we don't know how that works as spirituality. Wait a minute. We've been told our whole lives that spirituality is a growing in a kind of cognitive comprehension of certain doctrinal statements that we can memorize and repeat. And now you're saying that the central spiritual practice, at least in Jesus's conception, is eating together. I don't understand how that grows us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's right. Like, I don't really understand it either, but it doesn't really matter if I understand it.
But I don't understand how the others do either. So the other way I look at it, go, well, if this is your alternative, do you understand that? I mean, because it is ethereal.
Yeah.
And I would say that, you said that that kind of that ethereal, idealized view of spirituality doesn't really have I forget how you said it, but the body isn't really considered in that. But I think it actually is, and it seemed, at least in the way I felt about it, it's either considered as simply a conduit to this other higher thing, mm-hmm. Or worse, it's considered an obstacle. And I think both of those things are in the maybe not in the verbalized description of what the spiritual life looks like, but they are in the way it's owned and embodied, and often in the way it's communicated about, even if it's not stated explicitly. Yeah, I think that's right. And that notion of a meal, mm-hmm. With all that goes with it. I mean, we've sort of reduced the meal to the elements, mm-hmm. right? In the Eucharist or the sacrament, we've actually diminished the embodied reality of the meals that Jesus shared with his disciples. We've even sort of reduced those to a kind of spiritualized engagement, rather than a deeply human endeavor where you sit down and share a meal together, with the attendant conversation and joy and experience of a shared humanity. Yeah, I remember I was doing a funeral. This is and I was among Christians, but I remember saying something at the graveside service about the reality that we will walk this earth with this person again. That our hope isn't simply some kind of spiritualized view of existence, but that our hope is that we will share this space with this person in our bodies, and him and his body again. Mm-hmm. And I remember how startled the looks were. Mm-hmm. I was like, whoa, maybe that's not good funeral material. I really started second guessing myself, but I when I think about this, to me, this is the I don't know how else to make sense of one, the biblical account of, of future life, but also just the pragmatics of just the practical reality of even what the word redemption means. Redemption is a it's a it's not, it can't be something wholly other, because the moment it becomes wholly other, it's not really it's not a redeemed, it's not bought back from destruction. It's remade into something it never was. And to conceive of kind of the ultimate human existence as somehow a spiritual one, that's the highest form to be attained, belies the story that the whole story, that it just that God has come to, that he loves this world, and he's come to redeem it from its bondage to brokenness.
I don't want to I totally agree, and I don't want to overstate the case, but I wonder if all of our modern human frictions and tensions are in some way related to our inability to consider our embodiedness as fully us, that we are our bodies. One, I think it was Ken Myers who said, the human is embodied spirit and inspirited body. It's both. It's not that we're a spirit with a body suit on, a flesh suit. It's not that we are primarily a body that happens to be vivified by a spirit for a while, but the definition of the human is inspirited body and embodied spirit. And so much of certainly our contemporary frictions in our experience of the world is related to trying to become something other than what we are.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that it is what I most need to hear is that it's okay to be what you are.
What, so why does it bother us so much to think of Jesus as a manger wetter? Why does that strike us as, I don't know, immodest, or to speak of Jesus as in the fullness of his humanity? I struggle with it too. So this isn't me casting aspersions elsewhere. But if that's true, if what you just said is true, then I think that struggle that you mentioned earlier, to even say that, and kind of how it feels wrong to say, says that we there's something amiss in our thinking about the goodness of humanity, and the goodness of our humanity, and the goodness of Jesus's embodiment. I think about I've bastardized what's his name, who wrote Visions of Vocation.
Yeah, Stephen Garber,
who says, our vocations are integral, not incidental, to the kingdom of God. And I took that and said, I've said our bodies are integral, not incidental to our our salvation, who we are as in our understanding of redemption. And I believe that, but then I see so much still confusion in my own thinking, and then I see it also reinforced in the way the church continues to talk about typically spirituality, what it looks like to grow and toward wholeness as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the churches that I've worked in and with and for, they sort of have this perennial struggle between what they call these like social events and real discipleship education, right? We say
Right.
the men should get together at a pub and have some beers, or the married couples should get together and I don't know, do lawn bowling. I've never done lawn bowling, so I don't know what that's like, but yeah. The social things are fine. Those social things are good, but what about the real education? And what I want to say is the best education, the highest possibility for spiritual growth is when I'm doing something with other people, my body included.
Yes. And I think, and I want to add to that because I want to say doing something, so maybe I ought to ask it as a question. So what are the things about us in that shared experience that make it uh, a good context for our move down the path toward shalom,
Mm-hmm.
toward wholeness as humans. One thing I wanted to say is just joy, just enjoying each other's, enjoying the moment with other people. Seems to be one thing, but then I started thinking about, I think it could also be a common goal and purpose and sense of mission together, right? It could be we're I don't know, digging a ditch together, but we're in that shared moment and experience. There's a sort of rehumanization of our being.
I think the tempting thing, Shaner, is to try to outline the conceptual constituents to a shared experience. There's vulnerability, there's joy, there's being together, right? But I think that's the risk of trying to figure out how we can do this without bodies, right?
We just make a program of it, right?
Well, because we could do that over Zoom. Couldn't we do that over Zoom? You can have joy over Zoom. You don't have to be near each other. You don't have to be in the same room. And what I want to say is some things that feel totally mundane are actually the ways in which we grow the most. So like, why do we need to share space? Because you can't give up your chair for someone if you're not in the same room. That's why. You can't embrace someone in a hug if you're not in the same room. You can't. You can't hold a door open for someone if you're not in the same room. You can't give someone the dry erase marker with which you're going to make a mark on the board. You can't defer to them and give it to them instead unless you're in the same room. So yes, joy and togetherness and vulnerability and everything else. Yes, those things are central to the growth together. But to the degree that we try to achieve those things without including us as ourselves expressed in time and space. To that degree, I think we'll find the experience anemic. And I think you only have to look at what we kind of now universally recognize at the failed attempts of replacing a physical classroom with online education over the last few years to prove exactly what I'm saying. If the body is incidental to the educational process, then why do I have to be in a classroom with other students and with the teacher? Well, it turns out the body isn't incidental. The body is integral. You can't learn without being there. Not in a way that's optimal, not in a way that's fully human, not in a way that allows me to bring my whole self to the process. Like, I think this is a legitimate question. I don't pretend to know the answer fully or even partially. But why did we see grade school and high school levels of depression grow exponentially as we replaced our physically being together with only digitally being together? What happened? The only difference, right, is now I'm at home on a computer screen rather than in a classroom. And I recognize there's layers and layers of differences that are all influencing it. But I think a major factor has to be that that sort of digital engagement, a disembodied engagement, actually says to me, you can't be who you are in this space. You can only be a part of who you are, the idea part. You can't be the embodied part.
Yeah. I keep thinking of the of Genesis, where everything is set. It's Adam and God with no hindrances at all.
It's the ideal conception of evangelical piety. It's just me Absolutely. And God, with no barriers, no one around to get in the way. Yeah.
And God says it's not good.
And it's the only time he said something was not good. It was the first and only time that he said it's not good that man should be alone.
This is not workable. This is actually not the way it was. This is not what I've designed. I've not designed for it to be me and Jesus, you and Jesus.
Right.
I've designed it to be us. And in this flesh on flesh, eyeball to eyeball kind of experience of the world and God in the world, and God among ourselves, among us, right? Between us. And yeah, I find that, like, the profundity of that statement, I wish it sort of I wish there was a way to express it, other than to just set up the way we just have and say, God is the one from his very lips said this is not good. Oh, have you thought much about why there seems to be it seems like the path is tilted only in one direction, right? Typically with these kinds of things, we can say, oh, there's ditches on either side. And but I've never inhabited a world where I thought, where I never have. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it certainly can exist to the degree that the world we're describing has a world that says, that humanizes God. I know it, like I said, I know it exists, but it seems like the temptation throughout the history of the church, the bigger impulse, the greater impulse, is to move in the direction of over spiritualizing the whole story of God and humanity.
Well, and if I could, if I to add a layer of what I sense as clarity to that, what we mean by that is dematerializing. When you say over spiritualizing, what we mean is dematerializing, right? Moving away from this like physical and physiological experience and existence to some kind of piety as contemplation, piety as a kind of ethereal, well, a kind of ethereal and out of body experience, right? Where the soul is unhindered by the body.
Or an ideological confession, right? It's either ideas that can properly confess, or some kind of spiritual existence of spiritual communion with the spirit that's out there that really only exists between you and that spiritual experience.
I think there's a lot of influences to our sense that advancement as a human being is increasingly to distance ourselves from our embodiment. If we take all of our modern efforts toward advancement and toward progress as a kind of religious indication, we are enamored with and preoccupied by the possibility of not being limited to time and space by our bodies, that we can digitally upload our psyche to some server and it can now live forever and be downloaded to any number of bodies, which become incidental to the existence of that psyche. And maybe that's part of it. Part of it is our sense that in order to become ideal, in order to become the optimal version of ourselves, we have to become like God, in that he is everywhere. He's not limited to time and space. And so we should aspire to becoming like God in that way, so that we have maybe succumbed to the temptation to imagine the factual limitations of embodiment as themselves deficiencies, that I have to be here, and when I'm here I can't be somewhere else at the same time. That's a deficiency. And I think there's whole like lists of psychoses that that grow out of that sense that I have to be able to be everywhere at once. I think that's part of it, as our sense of who God is has become our sense of the ideal human. And if God can be everywhere, then I need to figure out a way to be everywhere, and the body is the main hindrance to that accomplishment. I think that's part of it. I think there's probably a ton of like, well, what we generally refer to as a kind of like Victorian prudishness about the facts of embodiment, the eccentricities of needing to eat and then naturally producing waste. I mean, think about the example of Jesus as the manger wetter. If we can jettison our kind of revulsion to that sort of thing, like it seems like it's totally fine, like totally normal, like everybody goes to the bathroom, right? So why is it bad? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I was thinking, I wonder what the betrayal of our bodies does to this narrative for us. Watching my father with Alzheimer's, right? And to have his body betray him in that way. Or a family member with ALS.
Yeah.
I wonder if the frailty of the body shapes that and causes us to misread what the signals that we should be taking from the frailty of our bodies. or the
Mm-hmm.
fact that even these other kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have to eat,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and that creates waste, and you know, that birth is bloody, and so I just wonder if maybe the frailty of our experience in our body sends us out longing for something that's not marked by time and
Yeah.
space, right? That doesn't get wounded by aging,
Yeah.
and our spirit, our spirit souls, um uh at least in the way we conceive of them, and this may be true or not, I don't really know actually, but they seem to be above the kind of tarnish of time and wear and tear, um
Mm-hmm.
and so I wonder if that drives some of our wandering in understanding how integral our bodies are. I don't think you can separate body and soul in any real way, but we do so in talking about them.
Mm-hmm.
But even in our understanding of our souls.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. I mean, I think none of us have ever experienced what it's like to be embodied in a way that's not corrupted and fallen, that has experienced the real injustices that are present in the world, both in a moral sense and in a physiological sense. Um, so it's really hard to imagine if we take our current embodied experience with all of the difficulties that attend to it and imagine I'll be like this forever. Like that doesn't sound particularly attractive. You know what I mean? Because it's hard to imagine what it's like to have a body that doesn't betray you in some ways. But the promise of the new heavens and the new earth, the promise of the way the world will be when everything is set aright, is painted in terms of a meal. Again, a thing for which bodies are utterly necessary. That's the invitation to the future when the world is set the way it's supposed to be, is an invitation to a feast, where there will be music and dancing and wine that flows endlessly and everything else. So even if we cast ourselves into the future that the story of the Bible is telling, it still suggests this richly embodied experience. And I think to put that really succinctly, what the story of the Bible is saying is when you're invited to the way the world is supposed to be, you are invited as you. You are invited as you. Your whole self gets to come. It's still really difficult to imagine what it would be like to be there without the pain of a herniated disc, without the loss of memory from dementia, which is this physiological decline, neurological and physiological decline, without the frictions of being a double amputee from fighting in a war, or without the deficiencies of any number of things that ail us in and through our bodies. So I think that's part of it. Part of it is I just can't imagine what it's like to experience total happiness while having a body, while being embodied, because I've never experienced that before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes me think of the um oh God, the Arcade Fire song "My Body Is a Cage."
Mm-hmm.
The line is, "My body is a cage that keeps me from dancing with the one I love."
Yeah.
Um, this this reality that our bodies so often feel like a hindrance to
Yeah.
the joys, and the dreams and the hopes that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it makes me want to ponder. I want to hear what you think. So when you think of Advent,
Mm-hmm.
when you think of God with us,
Mm-hmm.
in his incarnation, how do you begin to unpack Advent into those hopes and dreams and betrayals of our embodiment and our life,
Mm-hmm.
our present life still in this world, in these
Mm-hmm.
bodies,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
you know, beautiful and broken as they are.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind first, and this might be a particularly modern and individualistic kind of take on it. Maybe we could think about it in communitarian ways also, but I could imagine looking into that manger and hearing someone say, "This is the God man. This is God become one of us." Immediately imagining, immediately realizing, turns out it's okay to be one of us. It turns out it's
Yeah.
okay to be one of us. It kind of re-enchants for me the beauty and the glory of being a human. That all of these things that characterize being a human are my glory. That it is not only okay, but amazing to be human. So I think that's what I think first. And my mind immediately fast forwards to the end of at least that chapter of the story, which is a beginning of the whole future of the story, where that body, that God man, is killed and then resurrected. And I think what that suggests is this is where all material is going. All If the representation, the representative of creation, humankind, can be resurrected, then all of creation can be resurrected. Not only do we not then experience in the future the deficiencies and infelicities and injustices that we experience through our bodies, disease and woundedness and injury and pain and everything else, but the whole world will be freed from all of the injustices and pains and woundings, and all of that will be taken away, because God became one of us, was killed and then raised from the dead. He is
As one of us.
as one of us. He is pulling all of us and everything with him into a new future, not where we become something else, but where we become most fully ourselves.
I gotta tell you, that statement, your statement that it turns out that it's okay to be one of us.
Mm-hmm.
That hit me hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I think this part of my spiritual heritage. Um, I think it's a large part of my spiritual heritage, but it's also probably a very human struggle as well. But I feel like my whole life has been an attempt to not be one of us, to not include myself. Or I mean, I guess the way to just say it straightforwardly is it's a kind of spiritual world that has taught me to kind of hate myself,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and to try to somehow become something other
Mm-hmm.
than who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Which at my age is it's left me still very confused.
Yeah.
Because trying to sort through what that even means, um, and and sort of and try to embrace that notion that it not only is it okay, but it's good to be one of us. This is what God says.
Yeah.
And behold, this is very good. It totally makes sense that Christmas, the incarnation, and the resurrection are the pillars of this whole story. These two difficult to embrace, understand mysteries are mysteries, so mysterious in their humanity.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're mysterious. If it was God sort of in a vision, God communicated through the mouth of a prophet, but God born, God killed, and God raised from the dead, that all the deep mystery is in the humanity of the story of God.
Don't Hold Me to This podcast is a production of Don't Hold Me to This. You can find out more, do some more reading, and get in touch at don'tholdmetothis.com. No apostrophe.